Good morning. Today I'm going to go through the notes for lesson 11. This is definitely going to be split up into more than one video because I have a big demo at the end that I'm going to do with nested loops. The end of the lesson, or the end of the video, is probably the most important part of the video, so please don't try to shortcut listening and watching what I'm doing. Okay, so let's talk about a for loop. Well, what is a loop in general? What is a loop in programming? A way for us to execute a statement or statements as many times as we need to. In fact, Wikipedia says that a loop is a control flow statement which allows code to be executed repeatedly. That means over and over again. So a loop is a block of code that is repeated with certain rules about how to start and end the process. So let's look at a simple program that uses a for loop to print the numbers 1 through 5 on separate lines, followed by the word done. So my program is called EX1, and I have a for loop. It says for int I equals 1, semicolon, I less than 6, semicolon, I plus plus. I have a set of curly brackets that go with the for loop. Inside of the for loop, I have a print statement that's printing the value of I. And I have a comment here that says, what's inside of here, this one SOPLN, is the code to be repeated. After I'm done with the for loop, I have another print statement that prints the word done. Down here, you can see the output, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the word done. Now, we're going to go through this in a second, but what I want to do is I want to first, let's break down the three parts of the for statement. First of all, when you type the word for, it's going to be purple. It's a reserved word. Whenever, just like with the if statement, there's no semicolon at the end of a for statement. But there are three parts to a for loop expression. The first is called the initialization expression. Then there'll be a semicolon. Then what's called the Boolean control expression, a semicolon, and then finally the last part, which has multiple names, but I usually call it the increment-decrement expression. Your notes call it the step expression. So there's three distinct parts to a for loop. So let's start with the first one. So what the initialization expression is, it's usually a variable used to manage the number of times we go through a loop. So this expression, I equals 0, is basically telling Java, well, this variable is going to start at a value of 1. This part where we initialize our variable to a value is only executed once, and we often refer to I, in this case, as the counting variable for the loop, or sometimes it's referred to as the loop variable. It's going to control how many times you go through the loop. The middle expression is called the Boolean control expression. So the way we look at this is we look at the current value of I, and we will continue to go through the loop as long as this Boolean expression is true. So the first time through the loop, I is 1. So is 1 less than 6? It is. So then we go inside the for loop. But more on that in a minute. We can use any Boolean expression, even one that uses ands and ors inside of it as well. As long as it will evaluate to true or false, it works. If the Boolean expression never goes false, so this is always true, this is called an endless loop or an infinite loop. An endless loop or an infinite loop. Sometimes people make a mistake when they write these Boolean control expressions and they never go true. So if the Boolean expression never goes true, the block of code inside the curly brackets for the for loop will never execute. The last part of the for loop is called our step, increment, or decrement expression. So what this does is this shows us how our counting variable increases or decrease or changes each time through the loop. So we can either increment by 1, decrement by 1, or maybe we want to take the current counting variable and multiply it by 5, or maybe we want to add some other value to it like x. Those are just examples. In our case, every time through the loop, we're just going to increment I by 1. Don't assume the variable is only going to increase or decrease by 1 each time through the loop, as is shown in this example here. Now, earlier in the course, we looked at the logic of a for loop, the logic of an if and an if-else statement. We're going to do the same kind of thing for a for loop. So our program starts at the top. We get to our for loop statement. The first thing we do is initialize our counting variable like we did above, I equals 1. Then we came upon our Boolean condition and we're going to evaluate it. Our Boolean condition in that last example was I less than 6. The first time through the loop, I was 1. So is 1 less than 6? It is, it's true. So we go inside the for loop where we execute the statements inside the curly brackets. Once we're done executing those statements, we'll increment I by 1. So when we go back up, I goes from 1 to 2. Then we check the condition again. Is 2 less than 6? I go inside. In our case, I print I. I'm finished with the loop. I increment I by 1 to 3. I check the condition. Is 3 less than 6? It is. I go inside. I print I, so I print 3. I'm done with the loop, so I increment I to 4. I go up. I check the condition. Is 4 less than 6? It is. I go inside. I print 4, or print the value of I, which is 4. I increment I to 5. I check the condition. Is 5 less than 6? It is. I go inside. I print the current value of I, which is 5. I'm done with the loop, so I increment I to 6. I go up and check the condition. Is 6 less than 6? It is not. So now I go down the false branch, and I continue on with the program, which the very last thing we do outside the for loop is we print the word done. So there are some special features or directives in a for loop. So we never put a semicolon at the end of a for loop. No semicolon there, or Java will ignore the rest of your loop. Always put the block of code you want to repeat inside of its own set of curly brackets. And I'm showing that here. So this line of code is associated with the for loop. It is the code to be repeated. It should be inside its own set of curly brackets. If you put a break statement inside of a for loop somewhere, once it's executed, the loop is immediately exited or terminated regardless of the Boolean expression. This is not something I think you really need to worry about. I'm not going to try to trick you with this or anything. It's just something that showed up in your notes. Okay, this looks like it got a little messed up, so hopefully I can figure it out. If you declare the loop counting variable inside the for statement, you can only use that variable inside of the for loop, is what it says here. If you need to use the loop or counting variable outside the for loop, just declare it before the if statement. So what I'm basically saying is if you look at this, and you look at what I did here. Here I declared I inside the for loop. That means I can only be used inside the for loop. But if I need I to be used elsewhere, if I declare it outside the for loop like I'm doing here, then I can be used anywhere in the program. And we'll look at more at that later. If only one line of code is needed inside the for loop, the curly brackets aren't necessary according to the syntax of Java. But it is bad programming practice and your teachers will mark it wrong. So just use the curly brackets, put it around the code that is to be repeated for a loop anytime you make a loop. Sometimes you will be asked the value of the loop variable after the loop finishes. For example, if we add the line system out print line I after the last line of code, the output will look like this. So notice that the loop will only terminate or end when I goes to a value of 6. So after we print the word done, if I print I, it will print 6. A few more things before I switch over to nested loops. How would you turn the loop in example 1 into an infinite or endless loop? There are many ways to do this by changing the Boolean control expression. For example, remember I was 1. So if I change this condition, I greater than 0 or I greater than or equal to 1, it will always be true. And remember, every time through the loop, I'm incrementing by 1. So that's always going to make this statement true. So this would always be true, never go false. That's an example of an infinite loop. And when I do my demo, I'm going to show you how that works. How would you change the Boolean control condition so it never executes? Remember, for our program, I started at 1. So instead of saying I less than 6, if you said I greater than 2 or I greater than 3 or something like that, that condition will never be true, so that loop will never execute. What if instead I wanted the numbers to print in reverse order? Well, I could start I at 5, I could print I, and then every time through the loop I could decrement I by 1 until I get to the end. So it would print 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And after it prints 1, it would decrement I to 0. The condition would be, is 0 greater than 0? The answer would be false, so our loop would end. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video because I want to have a whole video invested on the nested loops.